I want to start with the message you offered up today, which feels like a kind of a resounding defense of the spending the government's done and will continue to do. In other words, it's not time, you use the word austerity, it's not time to think about anything else. It's still time to think about shoring up the economy. Is that an accurate read of what you're telling Canadians?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, what I tried to lay out was that we need to be thinking about 3 stages. The first stage is the one we're in right now, and that is fighting the coronavirus and supporting Canadians and Canadian businesses while we're doing it. And, you know, as you pointed out, it does cost a lot of money, but we have to do it because the only way to effectively fight the coronavirus is to have social distancing, to limit social interactions. And that means shutting down parts of our economy. And we need to support Canadians and businesses if we expect them to do that. And this is not only the Canadian experience. You know, I was really struck today, Amanda, I'm sure you saw this too. Angela Merkel has taken the decision to introduce a limited shutdown in Germany right now, closing down restaurants, closing down gyms. They're in exactly the same position as we are, and they're going to be providing support to those businesses as they do it. And so we're in the same boat. That's what we have to do to fight the coronavirus effectively. So that is stage 1. Stage 2 is going to be, even once we get the virus under control, once we get a vaccine, we still have a really deep recession. This recession is deeper than 2008. And so we are going to have to build our way out of that recession. And building our way out of it is necessarily going to involve meaningful government investment. So that's going to be part 2, and it's going to be important to get that job fully done to really get to recovery. And then, of course, part 3, once we get there, will be to return to the status quo ante policies.
So, I mean, and I think most people everywhere, and this is, as you say, not a Canadian issue. This has been a Western world issue and global one. And that is spending happened because spending had to happen. We had an emergency. The government responded in record speed. It responded. At some point, though, Minister, the spending becomes a little more structural. It becomes more permanent, if you will. So as we see, for instance, the CERB translate into a revamped employment insurance program, childcare offered up as a support mechanism for COVID. Those are kind of longer term, non-emergency changes. How do you account for that in your thinking when, you know, the cost of those will remain after the emergency has passed?
Well, I don't think that the cost of them does remain. I mean, I think that the spending that we're doing right now is very much spending to fight COVID, and the support for workers, the support for businesses, which is now like fully in place. We have a real network and a real net, and that is going to be there until next summer. And that is very much support about fighting COVID. Now, have we learned some things in fighting COVID? Have we learned that we need to do a much better job on early learning and childcare in Canada? I think we definitely have. And I see working on that as a real priority. And by the way, as an investment in economic growth. You know, Quebec already shows that when you invest in early learning and childcare, you have higher participation by women in the labor force, and the economic returns pay for it. So early learning and childcare, I'm a very strong supporter of, and I think the economic returns definitely are there. And you have people like Brian Porter at Scotiabank saying this is something we have to do to power our recovery.
We have seen a fair amount of criticism about the testing and tracing regime in Canada because it would allow us to live with COVID. And living with COVID does appear to be something we're going to have to do longer than we had hoped in the beginning. How can we do better? How can the government do better, federally and provincially, to actually up our rapid test system, our tracing system, so that we can actually open our economies while living with the virus?
Well, there are so many sort of questions embedded there, and sort of let me try to take them in turn. on testing and tracing, we have all become amateur epidemiologists and amateur public health officials, and that's a good thing. And I think we all now know that the key to getting it under control is testing and tracing. And we're doing a much better job in Canada now than we were doing at the beginning when coronavirus first hit us. But we do have to do better. And that is something that the federal government is working very closely with the provinces and territories on doing things like providing provinces with support with contact tracers and so on. But it's a hard job, and I agree we have to do better. Now, when it comes to the second part of your question, this notion that, as we get new technologies available, we will be able to open up our economy more and live with COVID in a more open way. I certainly think that's something we need to hope for and work towards. And I'm glad that the federal government has now approved 5 rapid tests, and those are going out and being used across the country. But I would also urge us all to just be a little bit cautious about the notion that there's going to be a single magic technological bullet that allows us to behave completely as normal while COVID is in our midst. And to me, the experience of Germany is really educational there. I have a lot of respect for Angela Merkel. I think she and the German government, and like us, they have a federal system, so it's very much been Chancellor Merkel working with the Länder. I think they've done a really good job working on fighting COVID. They currently have a higher rate of new infections per population than Canada has, and they are currently taking some of the measures on restricting the kinds of activities like indoor dining in restaurants, like going to the gym, which places in Ontario and Quebec have restricted to fight the spread of COVID and to fight the second wave. So I think And Germany, as we know, also has deployed rapid testing technologies. So I think there seems to be, so far, based on the experience of countries around the world, no one seems yet, no matter what technologies they are using, to have figured out a way to fully operate business as usual without doing as, say, New Zealand has done and suppressing COVID entirely.
You mentioned Germany with some admiration. One thing Germany's done that Canada certainly has not is bailed out its airlines. The federal government's been quite silent on how to help our airlines. The German model, I think, it does include taking a stake. Do you have thoughts about what should happen for Canada's air sector?
Yeah, Germany has taken an equity stake and taken a seat on the board. So that is quite a strongly interventionist measure. When it comes to airlines, and maybe I can broaden the question to sectors that are particularly hard hit by the coronavirus, let me offer a few thoughts. The first is, as I'm sure, Amanda, you've heard from a lot of economists will generally argue that a broad-based program is likely to be the most effective. And so that's where we started. We started with broad-based business support programs, the wage subsidy, which provides a lot of support, these new rent subsidy supports, which we're going to be introducing in legislation soon. And the airlines, among many other sectors in the Canadian economy, have benefited from the wage subsidy, more than $1 billion worth of support there, and that's a great thing. We did, in the throne speech, commit to looking at more targeted support for particularly hard-hit sectors, tourism, hospitality, aviation, and that is something that we're looking at now.
All right, I do want to ask you, we've been waiting for a fiscal update. Can we expect a budget from you before the end of this year?
What we committed to in the throne speech was to provide an update, including fiscal projections. In my remarks today, I said that would be coming soon, and that will be coming soon.